The morning started like any other Tuesday at Riverside Market. Yuliana arrived at her fruit stand at 5:30, just as the sun painted the old brick buildings in soft orange light. She arranged her apples carefully, the red ones catching the early sunlight like small jewels. At 52, she had been selling fruit here for almost 8 years now, and she knew exactly how to make even the simplest display look welcoming. The ritual of setting up her stand had become a form of meditation for Yuliana. First, she would unload the wooden crates from her small pickup truck, checking each piece of fruit for bruises or soft spots. She believed that selling damaged fruit was dishonest, even if customers might not notice immediately. Her mother had taught her this principle long ago. Your reputation is built one transaction at a time, mija. Never compromise it for a few extra dollars. Next came the arrangement. Yuliana had discovered that colors mattered more than most people realized. The deep red apples went in front, where the morning light would make them glow. Golden oranges were placed at eye level for children, who often chose fruit based on what looked most appealing. Green pears were arranged in small pyramids that suggested abundance without waste. She had learned these techniques not from any business course, but from 8 years of watching what made people smile when they approached her stand. "Good morning, Yuli," called Maria from the flower stand next door. "Beautiful apples today." Yuliana smiled and nodded. She was not someone who spoke much, but her neighbors at the market had grown used to her quiet ways. They knew she was reliable, honest, and always had the freshest fruit in the market. What they didn't know was what she had done before selling fruit. Maria Rodriguez had been selling flowers at Riverside Market for 15 years. She was a warm, talkative woman in her early 60s who treated everyone like family. Over the years, she had tried many times to draw Yuliana into longer conversations, sensing that there were interesting stories beneath her quiet exterior. But Yuliana always kept things polite and brief, sharing just enough personal information to be friendly without revealing anything significant about her past. "How was your weekend?" Maria asked, arranging a bucket of fresh sunflowers. "Quiet," Yuliana replied, adjusting a display of bananas. "I worked in my garden. The tomatoes are doing well this year. You should bring some to sell when they're ready. Customers always ask about fresh vegetables." "Maybe," Yuliana said, though she had no intention of expanding her business. The fruit stand provided exactly what she needed: steady income, routine, and the kind of peaceful work that didn't remind her of other times in her life. The market was housed in a converted warehouse from the 1920s. The building was 3 stories tall, with shops on the ground floor and apartments above. It was old, but well-loved, with exposed brick walls and large windows that let in plenty of natural light. The ground floor housed 22 vendors selling everything from fresh produce to handmade jewelry. The second floor had been converted into office space for small businesses, while the third floor contained 12 small apartments, mostly rented by young professionals and elderly people who enjoyed living in the heart of the downtown area. On busy days, the place buzzed with families shopping for fresh food, tourists taking photos, and vendors calling out their prices. The acoustics of the old warehouse meant that sounds carried and mixed together in a pleasant hum of commerce and community. Children's laughter echoed off the brick walls, mixing with the sound of vendors greeting customers and the gentle clink of coins in cash registers. Yuliana wore her usual simple clothes: dark jeans, a white cotton shirt, and comfortable walking shoes. Her brown hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her hands showed the honest calluses of someone who worked with them every day. She had strong shoulders and moved with a certain efficiency that some people noticed but never questioned. There was something about the way she carried herself, upright, alert, economical in her movements, that suggested a background in discipline and training, but most customers assumed it was just the bearing of someone who had worked hard all her life. Her hands told their own story, though few people looked closely enough to read it. The calluses on her palms came not just from handling fruit crates, but from years of gripping tank controls and maintenance tools. A small scar on her left thumb was from a piece of shrapnel that had found its way through her gloves during a repair job in Iraq. The way she automatically scanned the market every few minutes, noting exits and potential problems, was a habit learned in places where situational awareness could mean the difference between life and death. Around 9 o'clock, the first customers started arriving. Mrs. Patterson came for her weekly bag of oranges. She was a retired teacher in her 70s who had been shopping at the market since before Yuliana started working there. Mrs. Patterson always paid with exact change, counted out from a small leather purse, and she always asked about Yuliana's health with genuine concern. "You're looking well today, dear," said Mrs. Patterson, examining the oranges with the careful attention of someone on a fixed income. "How are you feeling?" "I'm fine, thank you," Yuliana replied, weighing out exactly 2 pounds of oranges. "These are very sweet this week. They came from a grove in California that's been growing citrus for 3 generations. Mrs. Patterson nodded approvingly. She appreciated that Yuliana knew the sources of her fruit and could provide these small details that made shopping feel more personal. "You always have the best information about your products. I've told my neighbors that you're the most knowledgeable vendor in the market." "I like to know where my food comes from," Yuliana said simply. "It helps me serve my customers better." This was true, but it was also incomplete. Yuliana's knowledge of supply chains and logistics came partly from her business experience, but also from military training in procurement and supply management. In the Army, knowing your suppliers and understanding logistics could determine whether your unit had the resources it needed when trouble started. Old habits of thoroughness and attention to detail had served her well in civilian life, even if she rarely thought about their origins. Then came the Johnson family with their 3 young children, who always wanted to pick out their own bananas. The youngest, a boy named Tyler, who was about 4 years old, had specific requirements for his fruit. Bananas had to be yellow but not too yellow. Apples had to be red, and oranges had to be the happy kind, which Yuliana had learned meant the ones with navels that looked like smiles. "Miss Yuli, do you have any happy oranges today?" Tyler asked, standing on his tiptoes to see over the counter. "I saved some special ones just for you," Yuliana said, reaching for a bag of navel oranges with particularly pronounced navels. "See? These ones look extra happy today." Tyler giggled and carefully selected 3 oranges, holding each one up to examine its face before putting it in the bag. His parents, James and Sandra Johnson, watched with the patient amusement of people who had learned to work with their child's particular quirks. "You're so good with him," Sandra said quietly. "Do you have children of your own?" It was a natural question, one that Yuliana had been asked many times over the years. The answer was no. She didn't have children. There had been a time when she thought she might, when she was younger, and believed that military life could be balanced with family life. But relationships had proved difficult during her years of deployment, and after the accident that ended her military career, she had been too broken to consider building a family. Now, at 52, children seemed like something that belonged to other people's lives. "No," she said simply, "but I enjoy meeting the families who shop here." James Johnson looked like he wanted to ask more questions. There was something about Yuliana that intrigued people, a sense that there were interesting stories beneath her quiet exterior. But Tyler was getting restless, and Sandra was checking her watch, so they completed their purchase and moved on to other vendors. Yuliana served them all with the same quiet courtesy, weighing fruit accurately and making change quickly. She had developed a reputation for fairness and reliability that brought customers back week after week. Some vendors at the market were known for their personality and showmanship, calling out to passers-by and engaging in elaborate sales pitches. Yuliana's approach was different. She let the quality of her fruit speak for itself, and customers appreciated her straightforward, no-pressure style. By 10:30, the market was getting busy. The coffee shop at the far end, run by a young couple named David and Lisa Chen, was filled with people reading newspapers and checking their phones. The aroma of fresh coffee and baked goods drifted across the market, mixing with the scents of fresh flowers from Maria's stand and the clean smell of just-washed vegetables from the produce vendors.
Children ran between the stalls while their parents shopped. their voices echoing off the high ceiling of the old warehouse. The sound of conversation mixed with the calls of vendors and the cash registers ringing up sales. It was the kind of bustling, friendly atmosphere that made the market feel like the heart of the community. Yuliana was helping a young mother choose the best apples for her baby when she smelled something that made her freeze. Smoke. Not the pleasant smell of food cooking, but the sharp, dangerous smell of something burning that shouldn't be. The scent hit her like a physical blow, instantly transporting her back to a dusty road outside Baghdad, where smoke had meant something very different and very deadly. For a moment, she was 27 years old again, sitting in the driver's seat of an M1 Abrams tank, listening to her commander's voice through the intercom system and watching the horizon for signs of trouble. She forced herself back to the present and looked around quickly, her training from years ago automatically taking over. Other people hadn't noticed yet, but she could see a thin line of dark smoke coming from somewhere above the coffee shop. Her eyes tracked the smoke's movement, automatically calculating wind direction and likely spread patterns. The smoke was darker than it should be for a small kitchen fire, and it was moving in a way that suggested the source was growing. "Excuse me," she said quietly to the young mother. "I think you should take your baby and leave the building now." The woman, who had been comparing two different types of apples, looked up in confusion. "What? Why?" "Just trust me, please. Take the baby and go outside now." Something in Yuliana's voice, a tone of absolute authority that seemed to come from nowhere, made the woman listen. She picked up her baby and walked quickly toward the main entrance, looking back once with a puzzled expression. Yuliana moved fast but calmly to Maria's flower stand. "Maria, we need to get everyone out. There's a fire upstairs." Maria looked where Yuliana was pointing and saw the smoke, which was getting thicker by the minute. "Oh my God!" "Should I call 911? "Yes, call them now. But we need to get people moving. The fire department will take time to get here." Maria pulled out her cell phone with shaking hands, while Yuliana stepped into the center of the market. She took a deep breath and accessed training she hadn't used in over a decade. How to manage a crisis situation involving civilian evacuations. "Everyone, please listen carefully," she said, raising her voice enough to be heard throughout the market, but keeping her tone calm and authoritative. "There is a fire in the building. We need to leave now in an orderly way. Parents, please take your children and walk quickly to the main exit. Don't run, but don't wait." The reaction was immediate, but mixed. Some people looked around, confused, trying to locate the source of the smoke. Others immediately started moving toward the exit, trusting the authority in Yuliana's voice even if they didn't understand why. A few customers seemed annoyed, as if this were an inconvenience rather than an emergency. David Chen emerged from the coffee shop, his face pale with worry. "I can smell electrical burning from somewhere upstairs," he called out. "It's getting stronger." That information changed the dynamic immediately. The smell of electrical fire was something most people recognized as dangerous, and the pace of evacuation picked up noticeably. But then someone shouted from near the back of the market, "The main stairs are blocked. There are people trapped upstairs." That changed everything. Yuliana felt something shift inside her chest, like a switch being thrown that she hadn't used in years. For 8 years, she had lived quietly, avoiding situations that reminded her of her past. She had chosen the fruit business precisely because it was peaceful, predictable, and safe. No one got hurt selling fruit. No one depended on her for their survival. She didn't have to make split-second decisions that could mean the difference between life and death. But now, hearing that people were trapped, she felt her old training take control. The civilian woman who sold fruit stepped aside, and the tank commander who had once led a crew through enemy territory stepped forward. She walked quickly to the back of the market, where a narrow service staircase led to the upper floors. The smoke was much thicker here, and she could hear voices calling for help from above. The main staircase, which provided the primary access to the offices and apartments upstairs, was indeed blocked by flames that had spread from what looked like an electrical fire in the second-floor utility room. "Stay calm up there," she called up the service stairs. "Help is coming." Tom Rivera, who owned the hardware stand near the back of the market, appeared beside her. Tom was a man in his 60s who had worked construction for most of his life before starting his small business. He was practical, level-headed, and not easily rattled, but right now he looked worried. "Yuli, what are you doing? The fire department will be here soon." "Look at this smoke, Tom. Those people don't have time to wait." She studied the staircase with the eye of someone trained to assess tactical situations rapidly. The main stairs were indeed blocked by flames, but this service staircase was still clear, though filling with smoke. The smoke was dark and thick, indicating that the fire was burning materials that produced toxic fumes. From her military experience, she knew they had maybe 10 minutes before the smoke would be too thick to breathe safely, and perhaps only 5 minutes before visibility would become a serious problem. "I'm going up," she said. "Are you crazy? You're a fruit seller, not a firefighter." Yuliana looked at him with eyes that suddenly seemed much older than her 52 years. For a moment, Tom saw not the quiet woman who sold apples and oranges, but someone who had made life and death decisions under pressure. "Trust me, Tom. I know what I'm doing." She started up the stairs, staying low to avoid the worst of the smoke. Behind her, she could hear Tom organizing the evacuation of the ground floor, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had managed construction crews and knew how to keep people safe on job sites. The sound of sirens was getting closer, but she knew they were still several minutes away. In emergency situations, those minutes could feel like hours, and they often determined who lived and who didn't. The second floor was an office space that housed several small businesses, an insurance agency, an accounting firm, a graphic design studio, and a translation service. The offices were small but well-designed, with modern furnishings that contrasted pleasantly with the building's historic brick walls. The space was filled with smoke, but it appeared to be empty. Everyone had already evacuated through the main stairs before they became blocked, but she could hear voices from the third floor, where the apartments were located. The voices sounded strained but not panicked, which was a good sign. People who were panicking made poor decisions and were harder to rescue safely. The smoke was much thicker on the third floor. Yuliana pulled her shirt up over her nose and mouth and called out, "Hello! Where are you?" "Here! We're here!" came a voice from the left side of the hallway. "The door is stuck." She found the apartment door, which had swollen from the heat and humidity and wouldn't open normally. The door was old and solid, built when construction standards emphasized durability over convenience. Under normal circumstances, it would require significant force to open a swollen door like this. But these weren't normal circumstances, and Yuliana wasn't an ordinary person trying to open the door. Using her shoulder and her body weight, techniques she remembered from her tank crew training for emergency exits from damaged vehicles, she forced the door open with a controlled impact that distributed the force efficiently. Inside, she found an elderly man and woman, both coughing heavily from the smoke that had begun seeping under their door. The apartment was small but neat, with family photos covering one wall and handmade quilts draped over the furniture. It was clearly the home of people who had lived there for many years and taken care to make it comfortable. "Can you walk?" she asked quickly, automatically assessing their condition for signs of smoke inhalation or other injuries. "I think so," the man said, though his voice was hoarse from coughing. "But my wife has a bad leg." She had surgery last month. That's okay. I'll help her. What are your names? Harold. This is my wife, Ruth. I'm Yuliana. Harold, I need you to hold on to my belt and follow me exactly. Ruth, I'm going to carry you. Don't be afraid. Ruth was a small woman, probably weighing less than 120 pounds, but carrying her down 2 flights of stairs filled with smoke would normally be very difficult for most people. However, Yuliana had been trained to carry wounded soldiers, and her body remembered how to distribute weight properly, how to maintain balance while moving through difficult terrain, and how to preserve energy for sustained effort. She lifted Ruth carefully, using a fireman's carry that positioned the older woman's weight across her shoulders in a way that allowed Yuliana to maintain her balance and keep one hand free. Ruth was lighter than the soldiers she had carried years ago, but the stairs were more challenging than flat ground, and the smoke made breathing difficult. Stay low, she instructed Harold as they started down the stairs. The air is better down here. Harold, despite his own fear and the difficulty of breathing, followed instructions precisely. He kept one hand on Yuliana's belt and stayed close behind her, trusting her to guide them safely through the smoke-filled stairwell. Halfway down to the second floor, they met 2 firefighters coming up. The firefighters were wearing full protective gear and breathing apparatus, moving quickly but carefully through the smoky environment. "Ma'am, you shouldn't be in here," one of them said, though his tone suggested admiration rather than criticism. "There are more people upstairs," Yuliana replied calmly, not stopping her descent. "At least one more apartment. The door on the right side was closed when I came up." The firefighters looked at each other, impressed by her calm efficiency and the useful information she was providing. They had expected to find panicked civilians who needed to be rescued, not someone who was already conducting an effective evacuation and providing intelligence about the situation. "Can you get these 2 out safely?" the second firefighter asked. "Yes, go help the others."
When Yuliana emerged from the building carrying Ruth, with Harold close behind her, a small crowd had gathered in the street. The early shoppers from the market had been joined by people from neighboring businesses and passers-by who had been drawn by the sound of sirens and the sight of smoke. Someone started clapping when they saw her emerge with the elderly couple, and others joined in. But Yuliana barely noticed the applause. She was focused on getting Ruth to the ambulance that had just arrived, her mind still in the tactical mode that prioritized mission completion over recognition. "Is she okay?" asked the paramedic, immediately beginning his assessment of Ruth's condition. Smoke inhalation, but she was conscious and responsive the whole time. Her husband, too, he's right there. The paramedic looked at Yuliana more carefully, noting that despite having just carried someone down 2 flights of smoke-filled stairs, she didn't seem to be having any trouble breathing and showed no signs of panic or shock. "Are you all right? You don't seem to be affected by the smoke." "I'm fine," Yuliana said simply. What she didn't mention was that her military training had included exposure to various types of smoke and chemical environments, and she had learned techniques for controlled breathing and remaining functional under conditions that would overwhelm most civilians. She also didn't mention that carrying Ruth down those stairs had been physically easier than many tasks she had performed during her military service. As she walked back toward the crowd, she saw Tom Rivera talking to a police officer and pointing in her direction. The officer approached her with the purposeful stride of someone who needed information. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Davis. The firefighters told me you went into the building and rescued 2 people. They said you seemed to know what you were doing." Yuliana shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. Anyone would have done the same thing. Officer Davis studied her face. He was an experienced policeman who had worked with many different types of people in emergency situations, and he recognized something in Yuliana's demeanor that suggested specialized training. "The fire chief wants to talk to you. He said you gave his men good information about where to find the other people trapped upstairs." "Did they get everyone out?" "Yes. Everyone is safe. But he wants to know how you knew so much about emergency procedures. Yuliana was quiet for a moment. For 8 years, she had avoided conversations about her background, deflecting questions with polite but vague responses. But today, having acted instinctively to save lives, she found that her usual reticence felt less important than honesty. I used to do different work. Before I sold fruit. Officer Davis waited for more explanation, but none came. What kind of work? Military. A long time ago. Around them, the firefighters were finishing their work. The fire had been contained to part of the second floor and hadn't spread to the residential area on the third floor. The market building was old, but well built, with thick brick walls and solid construction that had helped prevent the fire from spreading quickly. Most of the building would be usable again once repairs were made to the damaged areas.
Maria from the flower stand came over to Yuliana, her face flushed with excitement and concern. Girl, you saved those people's lives. How did you know to act so fast? Experience, Yuliana said quietly. What kind of experience? You never told us you were in the military. Yuliana looked at the building, where firefighters were still working to ensure that all hotspots were completely extinguished. Steam rose from the windows where water had been sprayed on the remaining embers. I was a tank operator. We had training for all kinds of emergencies. A tank operator? Maria's eyes went wide. When? 15 years ago. I got out in 2009. Tom Rivera joined them, overhearing the conversation. Why did you leave the military? Yuliana's expression changed slightly. For a moment, she looked very tired, as if the question had awakened memories she normally kept buried. We had an accident. My tank hit a roadside bomb. 3 of my crew members didn't make it home. The small group went quiet. Maria put her hand on Yuliana's arm in a gesture of comfort. I'm sorry, Tom said softly. It was a long time ago, Yuliana replied, though her voice suggested that time hadn't diminished the weight of the loss. But after that, I couldn't do the work anymore. Too many memories. Officer Davis had been listening quietly. That explains a lot. Your reaction time, the way you carried that woman, how you assessed the situation, that's military training. I thought I had left all that behind, Yuliana said. I chose to sell fruit because it's peaceful. Simple. No one gets hurt selling fruit. But you couldn't leave behind who you are, Maria said gently. When people needed help, you became a soldier again. As the afternoon went on, word spread through the neighborhood about what had happened. Local news reporters arrived and wanted to interview Yuliana, but she politely declined. She just wanted to clean up her fruit stand and go home to her small house on the outskirts of town, where she could sit in her garden and try to process what had happened. However, Harold and Ruth's family arrived at the scene and insisted on talking to her. Their daughter, a woman named Patricia, who appeared to be about Yuliana's age, approached with tears in her eyes. You saved our grandparents' lives, Patricia said, her voice thick with emotion. How can we thank you? You don't need to thank me, Yuliana said. I'm just glad they're safe. But we do need to thank you. My children almost lost their grandparents today. Ruth's granddaughter, a girl about 10 years old named Emma, stepped forward shyly. Are you a hero? Yuliana knelt down to the girl's level, bringing herself to Emma's eye level for the conversation. No, sweetheart. I'm just someone who used to be a soldier, and soldiers help people when they're in trouble. My dad says soldiers are heroes. Yuliana smiled, the first real smile anyone had seen from her all day. Your dad sounds like a smart man, but real heroes are the firefighters and paramedics who do this job every day. I just happened to be here when help was needed. Emma seemed to consider this seriously. But you were brave. You went into the fire. Sometimes grown-ups have to do scary things to help other people. That doesn't make us heroes, it just makes us responsible. Harold, who had been sitting in the ambulance while paramedics checked his vital signs, came over to join the conversation. "Young lady," he said to Yuliana, "I don't care what you call yourself. You saved our lives, and that makes you a hero in my book." "Harold's right," Ruth added, moving slowly but steadily with the help of a walker. "We wouldn't be here talking to our granddaughter if you hadn't come upstairs." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Fire Chief Rodriguez, a serious-looking man in his 50s who had been coordinating the emergency response. He approached Yuliana with the bearing of someone who was accustomed to taking charge of difficult situations. "Ms." he began. "Yuliana. Just Yuliana." "Miss." "Yuliana, I'm Chief Rodriguez. I wanted to personally thank you for your actions today. My men told me you provided valuable assistance and showed excellent judgment under pressure. I just did what anyone would do." "No, ma'am, you didn't." "Most people would have evacuated and waited for us to arrive. You went into a burning building and saved 2 lives. That takes special training and special courage." He handed her a business card along with a simple certificate printed on official fire department letterhead. "This is a civilian commendation from our department. We want you to know that your service, both military and civilian, is appreciated." Yuliana looked at the certificate, which was simple but official. The text read, "Presented to Yuliana in recognition of extraordinary courage and selfless service to the community during the Riverside Market fire emergency." "Thank you, Chief. But I hope I never have to do anything like that again." Chief Rodriguez smiled. "I hope so too. But if you ever decide you want to volunteer with our community emergency response team, you'd be very welcome. We need people with your kind of training and judgment." "I'll think about it," Yuliana said, though she wasn't sure she meant it. Over the next few days, Yuliana's quiet life was disrupted in ways both large and small. Word of her actions had spread throughout the neighborhood and beyond, carried by social media posts, local news coverage, and simple word-of-mouth storytelling. Customers at her fruit stand treated her differently, not with pity or excessive curiosity, but with a kind of respect she hadn't experienced since leaving the military. People who had bought fruit from her for years suddenly seemed to see her differently, as if her actions during the fire had revealed something about her character that had been there all along, but previously unrecognized. Mrs. Patterson, her regular customer, stopped by on Thursday morning with something special. "I brought you something," the elderly woman said, handing Yuliana a small wrapped package. Inside was a simple silver bracelet with a small charm in the shape of an apple. "I had this made for you," Mrs. Patterson explained. "The apple is for your new life, selling fruit and helping your community. But the silver is for your service. Both parts of who you are matter." Yuliana felt tears start in her eyes, the first tears she had allowed herself to cry in years. The bracelet was beautiful but simple, and the thoughtfulness behind it touched something in her that she had thought was permanently closed off. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice not quite steady. "You know," Mrs. Patterson continued, "my late husband was a veteran too. Korea. He never talked about it much, but I could see it in his eyes sometimes. The weight of things that happened long ago. It gets easier," Yuliana said, "but it never really goes away. Maybe it's not supposed to go away completely. Maybe we're supposed to carry some of it with us, so we remember why we need to take care of each other." That afternoon, Chief Rodriguez stopped by the fruit stand in civilian clothes, looking somewhat out of place among the displays of fresh produce. "Miss." "Yuliana?" "I'm Chief Rodriguez. I wanted to follow up on our conversation yesterday." "Of course. How can I help you?" I've been thinking about what you did, and I wanted to make a formal offer. We run a community emergency response program that trains civilians to assist in disasters and emergencies. We teach basic first aid, evacuation procedures, emergency communication, that sort of thing. He paused to select an apple from her display, examining it with the careful attention of someone who appreciated quality. Based on what I saw yesterday, you already have more training than most of our volunteers will ever receive. But you also have something else, the judgment to use that training appropriately. Would you be interested in joining our program? Yuliana weighed his words carefully. For 8 years, she had deliberately avoided anything that might remind her of her military service or put her back in situations where people's safety depended on her decisions. I appreciate the offer, Chief. But I chose this work because it's peaceful. I'm not sure I'm ready to get involved in emergency response. I understand. But consider this. Yesterday, you proved that you can't really leave that part of yourself behind. When people needed help, your training took over automatically. The question is whether you want to prepare for that possibility or just hope it doesn't happen again. He paid for his apple and handed her his card. Think about it. We meet Tuesday evenings at the fire station. No commitment required. Just come see what we do. As weeks passed, the market building was repaired and reopened. The fire had caused significant damage to the second-floor utility room and some adjacent offices, but the structure itself was sound. Harold and Ruth recovered completely from their smoke inhalation and often stopped by Yuliana's stand just to chat. Their relationship with her having evolved from customer-vendor to something more like family. Other vendors in the market began asking Yuliana for advice about safety procedures and emergency planning. Tom Rivera installed additional fire extinguishers in his hardware stand and asked her to show him the proper way to use them. Maria created an emergency contact list for all the vendors and posted it in a visible location. You know, Tom said one day while helping Yuliana unload a delivery of citrus fruit, before the fire, we all just thought of you as the quiet lady who sells fruit. Now we know you're the quiet lady who sells fruit and also happens to be a trained soldier who saves people's lives. I'm still the same person, Yuliana replied, arranging oranges in careful rows. Are you, though? Asked Maria, who was setting up a new display of autumn flowers. You seem different. More, I don't know how to explain it. More yourself, maybe? Yuliana considered this as she worked. It was true that something had changed since the fire, though she wasn't entirely sure what it was or how she felt about it. For a long time, I tried to forget everything about being a soldier. I thought that part of my life was over, and it only brought pain. And now I think maybe you can't really separate the parts of yourself. The soldier training helped me save Harold and Ruth, but it was also the fruit seller part of me that made me care enough to act. What about the pain? Tom asked gently. The memories of your friends who died? Yuliana paused in her work, her hands still for a moment as she considered the question. The pain is still there. It probably always will be, but maybe the way to honor their memory isn't to hide from who I used to be. Maybe it's to use what they taught me to help other people. That evening, for the first time in weeks, Yuliana drove out to the small cemetery where her garden was located. She had bought a plot there not for burial, but because the cemetery sold small garden spaces to people who wanted to grow flowers or vegetables in a peaceful setting. It was where she went when she needed to think. She sat on the wooden bench she had installed next to her tomato plants and thought about Chief Rodriguez's offer. The idea of joining the emergency response team both attracted and frightened her. It would mean acknowledging that she was still, in some fundamental way, a soldier. It would mean accepting responsibility for other people's safety again. But it would also mean using her skills and training for something positive, something that helped her community, rather than fighting in distant conflicts she didn't fully understand. As she watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Yuliana made a decision that surprised her. The next Tuesday evening, she drove to the fire station. The community emergency response training was held in a large room adjacent to the apparatus bay where the fire trucks were housed. About 20 people were present, ranging in age from college students to retirees. Some were clearly first-time attendees like herself, while others appeared to be experienced volunteers. Chief Rodriguez was leading the session, along with 2 other firefighters and a paramedic. The topic for the evening was basic emergency medical care: how to assess injuries, control bleeding, and provide care until professional help arrived. Before we start the practical exercises, Chief Rodriguez said, "I'd like to introduce our newest potential volunteer. This is Yuliana. Some of you may have heard about her actions during the market fire last month." There were murmurs of recognition from several people in the group. Yuliana felt uncomfortable with the attention, but nodded politely. Yuliana has military medical training, so she'll be helping us demonstrate some of the techniques tonight. The training session went well. Yuliana found herself falling back into the role of instructor almost naturally, helping demonstrate proper bandaging techniques and explaining how to assess someone for shock or serious injury. Her explanations were clear and practical, based on real experience rather than textbook knowledge. After the session, several people approached her with questions about military service and emergency response. One was a young man named Kevin, who had recently been discharged from the Marine Corps and was struggling with civilian life. "I heard you were Army," he said quietly. How did you make the transition?" Yuliana looked at him carefully. She could see something in his eyes that she recognized, the particular kind of restlessness that came from missing the sense of purpose and brotherhood that military service provided. "It took time," she said honestly, "and it wasn't easy." "What are you doing now?" "Working at a warehouse." "It's okay, I guess, but it doesn't feel important, you know?" "I understand. Have you thought about emergency services, police, fire, EMT?"
Kevin shook his head. "I thought about it, but I'm not sure I want to deal with violence and danger again. I've seen enough of that." "There are other ways to serve," Yuliana said. "This volunteer program, for instance, community service organizations, teaching, the skills you learned in the Marines, leadership, working under pressure, taking care of your team. Those translate to lots of civilian jobs." They talked for another 10 minutes about transition resources and ways to find meaningful work. When Kevin left, he looked more hopeful than when he had arrived. "You're good at that," Chief Rodriguez observed, having overheard part of the conversation. "Good at what?" "Mentoring. Helping people find their way. Have you thought about doing more of it?" Yuliana hadn't thought about it, but the conversation with Kevin had felt natural and important. She realized that helping other veterans transition to civilian life might be one way to use her experience constructively. 6 months after the fire, Yuliana made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She signed up to volunteer with the local emergency response team. She would continue selling fruit during the day, but 2 evenings a week, she would train with firefighters and paramedics. "I thought you wanted a peaceful life," Maria said when she heard the news. "I do," Yuliana replied. "But I learned something from the fire. Peace isn't about avoiding difficult situations. Peace is about being prepared to handle them when they come." The decision hadn't been easy. For weeks after Chief Rodriguez's invitation, Yuliana had wrestled with conflicting feelings. Part of her wanted to return to the quiet anonymity she had cultivated for 8 years. But another part of her, the part that had automatically taken charge during the fire, knew that she couldn't pretend that side of herself didn't exist. On her first day of volunteer training, Chief Rodriguez introduced her to the group. This is Yuliana. Some of you may remember her from the market fire last year. She's a veteran with excellent emergency response instincts, and she's here to help our community be safer. The training was more comprehensive than Yuliana had expected. It covered not just immediate emergency response, but disaster preparedness, community organization, and coordination with multiple agencies. She found herself enjoying the intellectual challenge of learning new systems and procedures. After the training session, a young firefighter named Jake approached her. "Ma'am, I heard you were a tank operator. That must have been intense." "It was," Yuliana said simply. "Do you miss it?" Yuliana thought about the question seriously. "I miss my team. I miss the feeling of having an important job to do. But I don't miss the danger or the fear." "What do you like about selling fruit?" "It's honest work. I help families eat well. I see the same people every week and watch their children grow up. It's a different kind of service." "And now you're adding emergency response to that?" "I think," Yuliana said slowly, "I'm finally learning that you don't have to choose between being peaceful and being strong. You can be both." As time went on, Yuliana became known throughout the neighborhood as someone reliable in emergencies. When old Mr. Chen had a heart attack at the bus stop, she was the one who performed CPR until the ambulance arrived. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, compressing his chest with exactly the right rhythm and force while calmly directing bystanders to clear space and call 911. When a child got lost during the 4th of July festival, she organized the search that found him safely. Using techniques from her military training, she divided volunteers into search teams, assigned specific areas to each team, and established communication protocols. The child was found within an hour, scared but unharmed. But she also continued to be known for having the best fruit in the market, for her honest prices, and for her quiet kindness to everyone who visited her stand. The duality of her life, peaceful fruit seller by day, emergency responder by night, felt increasingly natural. The skills she had learned in the military translated surprisingly well to both roles. Attention to detail helped her select the best produce and also assess emergency situations accurately. Leadership experience helped her manage difficult customers and also coordinate rescue efforts. The ability to stay calm under pressure served her well, whether dealing with a supplier problem or a medical emergency. One morning, almost 2 years after the fire, a young woman in military uniform stopped at her fruit stand. She was clearly nervous, fidgeting with her keys and looking around as if unsure whether she should be there. "Are you Yuliana?" the soldier asked. "Yes. How can I help you?" "I'm Sergeant Williams. I'm stationed at the base about an hour from here. My commanding officer told me I should meet you. He said you're a veteran who's made a good transition to civilian life." Yuliana handed the sergeant a bag of apples without being asked. "These are on the house. What did your CO tell you?" "That you found a way to use your military skills to help your community without staying in the military. I'm thinking about getting out when my enlistment is up, but I'm scared I won't know how to do anything else." "What's your MOS?" Yuliana asked, using the military term for job specialty. "Communications. I've been deployed twice, once to Afghanistan, once to Iraq." Communications is a good skill in civilian life, but more important than your specific job is how the military taught you to think, problem solving, staying calm under pressure, taking care of your team. Those skills work everywhere. "Did you always know you wanted to sell fruit?" Yuliana laughed, a sound that had become more common over the past 2 years. "No, I had no plan at all when I got out. I was dealing with some difficult memories, and I just wanted to do something completely different, something peaceful." "How did you know you were ready?" "I'm not sure I ever felt ready. I just started, one day at a time, and I learned that you can build a good life even when you're still healing from a hard one." They talked for another 20 minutes about transition programs, veteran support groups, and practical advice about job searching. Sergeant Williams mentioned that she was interested in emergency medical services, but wasn't sure if her military experience would be relevant. Your communications background would be very valuable, Yuliana told her. Emergency response is all about coordination and clear communication. Have you thought about working as a 911 dispatcher? I hadn't considered that. It's important work. You'd be helping people in crisis, using your military training, but in a civilian context. And it's steady work with good benefits. When Sergeant Williams left, she had Yuliana's phone number, several suggestions for career paths, and information about local veteran support services. You know, Maria said, having overheard the conversation, you're becoming quite the counselor. I don't give advice, Yuliana protested. I just tell people what worked for me. Same thing, Tom Rivera added. You're using your experience to help other people. That's what good leaders do. Yuliana considered this as she served her afternoon customers. Mrs. Patterson stopped by for her weekly oranges, moving more slowly than she had 2 years ago, but still sharp and observant. You look happy today, dear, the elderly woman observed. I feel useful, Yuliana replied. For a long time after I left the military, I felt like I was just existing, going through the motions. But now I feel like I'm contributing again. You've always contributed. You provide good food for families. You're honest in your business. You're kind to everyone who comes here. That's not nothing. You're right. But now I feel like I'm using all of my experience and training, not just hiding from part of it. The soldier and the fruit seller working together? Exactly. That evening, Yuliana attended her volunteer training session. The topic was crowd control during emergencies, how to help people evacuate safely without panic. As she practiced the techniques, she thought about how far she had come from the woman who just wanted to sell fruit quietly and avoid attention. The training involved role-playing scenarios where volunteers had to manage groups of people during simulated emergencies. Yuliana found herself naturally taking leadership roles, drawing on her military experience while adapting to civilian contexts. You have excellent instincts for this work, said Captain Morrison, one of the senior firefighters leading the training. Have you thought about pursuing more advanced certification? What kind of certification? Emergency Management Coordination. It's a formal program that would qualify you to help coordinate disaster response at the county level. The training is more intensive, but it would allow you to take on bigger responsibilities. Yuliana was intrigued, but also cautious. How much time would it require? The initial certification program is 6 months of weekend classes. After that, it's ongoing training and responding to actual emergencies when they occur. I'd still be able to keep my fruit stand?
Absolutely. This would be part-time work, though it could be demanding when emergencies happen. After training, Chief Rodriguez approached her. Yuliana, I have a proposition for you. The county is starting a new program to train civilian emergency response coordinators, people who can organize community preparation and response for natural disasters, fires, medical emergencies. It would be a part-time paid position. Are you interested? I would still sell fruit? Absolutely. This would be maybe 10 hours a week normally, plus additional time during actual emergencies. We think you'd be perfect for it. Yuliana thought about her younger self, the tank operator who had been so focused on military life that she couldn't imagine any other kind of existence. Then she thought about the woman who had spent 8 years selling fruit and trying to forget her past. Now she was being offered a chance to combine both parts of her life in service to her community.
Yes, she said, I'm interested. The certification program was challenging but rewarding. Yuliana learned about emergency management systems, disaster preparedness planning, interagency coordination, and community resilience. She studied how different types of emergencies, natural disasters, industrial accidents, public health crises, required different response strategies. Her military background gave her advantages in understanding command structures and logistics, but she also had to learn how civilian emergency management differed from military operations. The emphasis was on coordination and cooperation rather than command and control, and decisions had to be made with input from multiple agencies and community stakeholders.
3 months later, Yuliana was officially certified as a Community Emergency Response Coordinator. She kept her fruit stand, but now she also had a small office at the County Emergency Management Facility, where she worked on preparedness plans, trained volunteers, and coordinated with various agencies. Her first major test came during a severe thunderstorm that knocked out power to half the county and caused flooding in several low-lying areas. Yuliana found herself coordinating between the Red Cross, local fire departments, the sheriff's office, and community volunteers to establish emergency shelters and distribute supplies to affected families. "You're a natural at this," said Chief Rodriguez as they wrapped up operations after the power was restored. "It feels right," Yuliana agreed. "Like I'm finally using everything I learned in my life: military training, business experience, community relationships, all for the same purpose, which is taking care of people." The work was demanding, but satisfying. During non-emergency periods, Yuliana helped develop evacuation plans for schools and nursing homes, organized community preparedness workshops, and maintained relationships with volunteer organizations. When emergencies occurred, she helped coordinate the response, ensuring that resources were deployed efficiently and that different agencies worked together effectively. One particularly challenging incident involved a chemical spill at a manufacturing plant that required the evacuation of several neighborhoods. Yuliana found herself managing a complex operation that involved hazardous materials teams, medical personnel, transportation coordinators, and temporary housing providers. Her military experience with logistics and her civilian experience with community relationships both proved invaluable. "I don't know how we would have handled this without you," said County Emergency Manager Sarah Chen after the incident was resolved. "Your ability to coordinate between different agencies while keeping the community informed was exceptional." "I had good training," Yuliana replied simply. "Military training is important, but you've developed skills that go beyond that. You understand how to work with civilians, how to communicate with families under stress, how to balance urgency with compassion. That's not something you can learn from a manual." On the 5-year anniversary of the market fire, the local newspaper ran a feature story about emergency preparedness in the community. Yuliana was featured prominently, along with several other volunteers and emergency responders. The article described her as a veteran who found her calling in civilian service, and included quotes from many people she had helped over the years. Harold and Ruth, now in their late 80s but still living independently in their apartment above the market, were interviewed about the day she saved their lives. "She was like an angel," Ruth said in the article, "but an angel who knew exactly what she was doing." The reporter had asked Yuliana about her transition from military to civilian life, and her response was printed in full. "For a long time, I thought I had to choose between my past and my future. I thought being a soldier was one thing, and being a civilian was something completely different. What I learned is that the best parts of who I was in the military, the training, the commitment to service, the ability to stay calm in difficult situations, those things don't disappear when you change careers. They become tools you can use to build the life you want." When the article came out, Yuliana received calls and letters from veterans across the state. Some were struggling with their own transitions. Others were successfully building civilian careers, but wanted to connect with someone who understood their experience. "You've become famous," Maria teased her. "I've become useful," Yuliana corrected. "There's a difference." One letter particularly moved her. It was from a young veteran named Sarah who had been medically discharged after being injured in Afghanistan. She wrote, "I read your story in the newspaper, and it gave me hope. I've been feeling lost since I got out of the army. I thought my military skills were useless in civilian life. But reading about how you used your training to save people in a fire and how you became an emergency coordinator makes me think maybe I can find a way to serve again too. Thank you for showing that transition doesn't mean abandoning who you used to be." Yuliana wrote back immediately, inviting Sarah to visit the market and learn about volunteer opportunities in her own community. They began corresponding regularly, and eventually Sarah moved to Yuliana's county to participate in the emergency response program. As she sealed Sarah's first letter, Yuliana reflected on how much had changed since that Tuesday morning when she smelled smoke in the market. She had thought her soldier days were over, buried along with the painful memories of losing her tank crew. But what she discovered was that healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant integrating all parts of her experience into a life that honored both her past service and her present community. The fruit stand was still there, still providing fresh, honest food to families in the neighborhood. But now it was also a place where people came for advice, for help in emergencies, and for the quiet reassurance that someone was watching out for them. Mrs. Patterson, now in her 80s, still came for her weekly oranges, though she moved more slowly and sometimes needed help carrying her groceries to her car. "You know, dear," she said one morning, "when I first started shopping here, I thought you were just a very nice lady who sold good fruit. I never imagined all the other things you were capable of." "I didn't imagine them either," Yuliana replied honestly. "I thought I was just going to sell fruit for the rest of my life." "What changed your mind?" "I learned that you can't really choose which parts of yourself to keep and which parts to leave behind. When Harold and Ruth needed help, I couldn't stop being someone who knew how to help them. And once I accepted that, I realized I could choose how to use those abilities. For good rather than for war. For community rather than conflict." Yuliana had also started a small support group for veterans transitioning to civilian life. It met once a month at the community center, and attendance varied from 5 to 15 people, depending on the time of year and what was happening in people's lives. The format was informal: coffee, snacks, and conversation about the challenges and opportunities of civilian life. Sometimes they discussed practical matters like job searching or dealing with VA benefits. Other times they talked about the emotional aspects of transition, missing the camaraderie of military service, finding new sources of purpose and meaning, dealing with family members who didn't understand their experiences. "The thing about military service," Yuliana said during one meeting, "is that it changes you in ways you don't always recognize at the time. Some of those changes are helpful in civilian life, and some of them create challenges. The goal isn't to go back to who you were before. That's impossible. The goal is to figure out who you want to be now." Kevin, the young Marine who had approached her after her first training session, had become a regular attendee and eventually a co-facilitator of the group. He had found work as a paramedic and was thriving in his new career. "Yuliana helped me understand that I could still serve people without being in the military," he told new group members. "Emergency medical work uses a lot of the same skills: working under pressure, making quick decisions, taking care of people in crisis situations. But instead of fighting, I'm healing." The group had helped several members find meaningful careers in public service. One became a police officer, another joined the Forest Service, and a third started working for a nonprofit that provided disaster relief services. Not everyone found work directly related to their military experience, but all of them found ways to use the skills and values they had developed during their service. As winter approached, marking 6 years since the market fire, Yuliana received an unexpected visitor at her fruit stand. A man in his 60s, wearing a well-tailored suit, but moving with the bearing of someone who had spent time in uniform, approached her counter. "Miss Yuliana? I'm Colonel Peterson, retired. I heard about your work with Veteran Transition Services. How can I help you, Colonel? I'm working with a foundation that provides grants to programs that help veterans transition to civilian careers. We're interested in supporting your support group and possibly expanding it to other communities." Yuliana was surprised but cautious. "It's just an informal group. We meet once a month and talk. Sometimes the informal programs are the most effective. We've heard from several veterans who credit your group with helping them find direction in civilian life. That's exactly the kind of impact we want to support." They talked for 30 minutes about the group's activities and its potential for expansion. Colonel Peterson explained that the foundation was looking for grassroots programs with demonstrated effectiveness rather than large institutional initiatives. "What would funding mean?" Yuliana asked. "It could mean resources for training materials, meeting space, perhaps even a small salary for coordination activities. It would also mean connecting you with similar programs in other parts of the state so you could share best practices." "I'd need to think about it." "Of course, but I hope you'll consider it. What you're doing here, helping veterans find meaningful ways to serve their communities, that's exactly what our country needs." After he left, Yuliana found herself thinking about the unexpected trajectory her life had taken. 6 years ago, she had been focused solely on selling fruit and avoiding anything that reminded her of her military service. Now she was being offered funding to expand a veteran support program that had grown out of her own transition experience. That evening, she called Chief Rodriguez to discuss the opportunity. "It sounds like a great chance to help more people," he said. "But what do you think about it?" "I'm interested, but I'm also worried about it getting too big or formal. What works about our group is that it's small and personal. People feel comfortable sharing things they might not talk about in a larger setting. Those are legitimate concerns. But maybe there's a way to expand without losing the personal touch. You could train other veterans to facilitate groups in their own communities." "That's an interesting idea. You've become a teacher, Yuliana, whether you intended to or not. People learn from your example, how to integrate military experience with civilian life, how to find new ways to serve, how to build community connections. Maybe it's time to make that teaching more formal." Over the next few weeks, Yuliana talked to members of her support group about the foundation's offer. The response was unanimously positive. Several people volunteered to help with expansion efforts, and Kevin offered to help train new facilitators. "You changed my life," said Marcus, a veteran who had joined the group 6 months earlier and recently started working for the county's social services department. "If you can do that for other people in other places, I think you should." "We all helped each other," Yuliana replied. "That's how it works." "Yes, but you created the space for it to happen. You showed us that it was possible to use our military experience in civilian contexts. Without your example, I never would have thought about social work as a career." 3 months later, Yuliana accepted the foundation grant. The funding allowed her to reduce her hours at the fruit stand, though she kept it open 4 days a week, and spend more time on veteran services. She developed a curriculum for training new group facilitators, created resource materials for transitioning veterans, and began traveling to other communities to help establish similar programs. The work was challenging, but deeply satisfying. Each new group she helped establish felt like an extension of the original mission, creating spaces where veterans could support each other in finding meaningful civilian careers and building strong community connections. You know, Maria said one day as they both prepared their stands for the morning customers, when you first started selling fruit here, I never would have guessed you'd end up doing all this other work. I never would have guessed it either, Yuliana replied. But I think maybe this is what I was always meant to do. I just had to figure out how to get here. What do you mean? Everything I experienced, the military service, losing my friends, struggling with transition, finding peace in simple work, being forced back into action during the fire, all of it was preparation for what I'm doing now. I couldn't have helped other veterans if I hadn't gone through the transition myself. So the hard parts were worth it? Yuliana considered the question seriously. The hard parts were necessary. Whether they were worth it? That's a different question. I wouldn't wish what happened to my tank crew on anyone. But if I can use what I learned from that experience to help other people avoid some of the pitfalls I encountered, then maybe something good comes out of something terrible. As she spoke, Yuliana arranged a display of winter apples, their red skins bright against the gray December morning. The work was still peaceful, still honest, still important. But now it was part of a larger tapestry of service that included emergency response, veteran support, and community building. Customers began arriving for their morning shopping, and Yuliana greeted them with the same quiet courtesy she had always shown. Mrs. Patterson, now moving very slowly but still determined to do her own shopping, approached with her weekly list. "Good morning, dear. How are you feeling?" "I'm feeling useful," Yuliana said, the same response she had given for years, but with deeper meaning now.
You know, when I first started shopping here 8 years ago, I could tell there was something special about you. You had the bearing of someone who had done important things, even though you were just selling fruit. You could tell that? My late husband was a veteran, remember? I learned to recognize the signs, but I also could tell you were healing from something. You had that careful quality that people have when they're rebuilding their lives. Yuliana handed Mrs. Patterson her bag of oranges, counted her change carefully, and looked at the elderly woman with new appreciation. You never said anything. It wasn't my place to say anything. But I always hoped you'd find your way back to whatever kind of service you were meant to do. And now? Mrs. Patterson smiled. Now I can see that you have. As the morning progressed, Yuliana served her regular customers, families buying fruit for their children's lunches, office workers picking up healthy snacks, elderly people who appreciated her patient service and fair prices. Each transaction was simple and peaceful, but Yuliana now understood that peaceful didn't mean unimportant. Around noon, her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, the veteran she had been mentoring. Sarah had just completed her EMT certification and been hired by the local ambulance service. "Thank you for showing me that I could still serve people," the text read. "Starting my first shift next week." Yuliana smiled as she put her phone away. This was what her life had become, a combination of simple daily work and meaningful service to her community and fellow veterans. The soldier and the fruit seller had finally learned to work together. As she closed her stand that evening, Yuliana looked up at the repaired market building, where Harold and Ruth still lived. The windows were lit with warm light, and she could see the evening news playing on their television. Tomorrow, she would be back with fresh fruit, ready to serve her customers and her community in whatever way they needed. The soldier in her stood ready for any emergency. The fruit seller in her looked forward to another peaceful day of honest work. The mentor in her was prepared to help any veteran who needed guidance. And for the first time in many years, all parts of who she was felt perfectly at home in the life she had built. Yuliana had learned that you don't have to choose between peace and strength, between serving your country and serving your community, between honoring the past and building the future. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply show up, use the skills you have, and take care of the people around you. The market building stood quiet in the evening light, but Yuliana knew that tomorrow it would again be filled with families, conversation, and the daily business of community life. She had found her place in that community not by hiding who she had been, but by finding new ways to use the skills and values that military service had taught her. As she drove home to her small house and garden, Yuliana reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her to this point. She had started selling fruit as a way to escape her past, but she had ended up discovering that the past and present could work together to create something better than either could achieve alone. The road ahead was clear, and Yuliana was ready for whatever challenges and opportunities it might bring. 2 years later, Yuliana's veteran support program had expanded to 12 communities across 3 counties. She now spent 2 days a week traveling to different locations, training new facilitators, and checking on established groups. The work had grown beyond what she could have imagined when she first accepted the foundation grant. The expansion had brought unexpected challenges. Each community had different needs and resources, and what worked in one location didn't always translate directly to another. Rural communities faced different obstacles than urban ones. Some areas had strong veteran populations and supportive local governments, while others had limited resources and less awareness of veteran issues. In the small farming town of Millerville, Yuliana encountered resistance from some community leaders who questioned whether civilian employers should give preference to veterans. The mayor, a businessman who had never served in the military, worried that promoting veteran hiring might create resentment among other job seekers. "I appreciate your service," he told Yuliana during a tense meeting at City Hall, "but we need to be fair to everyone looking for work." "The goal isn't to give veterans unfair advantages," Yuliana explained patiently. "It's to help employers understand how military skills translate to civilian jobs, and to help veterans learn how to communicate their qualifications effectively." The conversation continued for an hour, with several community members expressing similar concerns. Yuliana found herself drawing on diplomatic skills she hadn't known she possessed, finding common ground and addressing misconceptions without becoming defensive. Eventually, she proposed a compromise. Instead of focusing specifically on veteran employment, the program would emphasize skills-based hiring that could benefit all job seekers, while particularly helping veterans who struggled to translate their military experience into civilian terms. "We're not asking for special treatment," she concluded. "We're asking for fair evaluation based on skills and qualifications rather than assumptions about what military experience means." The mayor agreed to a trial program, and within 6 months, 3 local businesses had hired veterans through the skills-based matching process. More importantly, the broader community had gained a better understanding of how military training could benefit civilian employers. Back at Riverside Market, Yuliana's fruit stand continued to anchor her increasingly complex life. The simple routine of selecting, arranging, and selling fresh produce provided a counterbalance to the emotional intensity of her veteran services work. Mrs. Patterson, now 86 and increasingly frail, still made her weekly visits, though she needed assistance getting to and from her car. Her granddaughter Jennifer had started accompanying her on shopping trips and had developed her own relationship with Yuliana. "Grandma always talks about how you saved those people in the fire," Jennifer said one morning while helping Mrs. Patterson select oranges. "She says you're the bravest person she knows." "Your grandmother has known a lot of brave people," Yuliana replied. "Teachers like her face challenges every day that require different kinds of courage. She says you remind her of Grandpa. The way you don't talk much about what you've done, but people can tell you've done important things." Mrs. Patterson nodded slowly. "My husband never talked about the war either, but I could see it in his eyes sometimes. The weight of experiences that changed him." "Does it ever get lighter?" Jennifer asked. "The weight, I mean." Yuliana considered the question carefully. At 56, she had been out of the military longer than she had been in it, but the experiences of her service years remained vivid and influential. "It changes," she said finally. "It becomes part of who you are rather than something you carry separately. When you find ways to use what you learned for good purposes, the weight feels more like responsibility than burden." These conversations reminded Yuliana of why her work mattered. Each veteran she helped transition successfully was someone who could contribute to their community while finding personal meaning and stability. The ripple effects extended to families, employers, and entire communities. One afternoon, while Yuliana was organizing supplies for an upcoming training session, Sarah Chen approached her stand. Sarah was now a paramedic supervisor and had become one of Yuliana's closest collaborators in emergency response activities. "I have something to tell you," Sarah said, her face showing a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "I've been accepted to medical school." Yuliana stopped what she was doing and looked at her friend carefully. "That's wonderful news. How do you feel about it?" "Terrified and excited. It's a 4-year commitment, and I'll have to cut back on some of my volunteer work. But I keep thinking about what you said about using our skills to help people heal instead of just surviving. You'll make an excellent doctor." "I hope so. But I wanted to ask, would you consider taking over coordination of the emergency response training program while I'm in school? Chief Rodriguez and I have talked about it, and we both think you're the best person for the job." Yuliana felt a familiar mixture of honor and apprehension. Each new responsibility felt like a step further from the simple life she had once wanted, but also closer to a sense of purpose she hadn't expected to find again. What would that involve? Overall coordination of civilian emergency response teams for the county, training supervision, resource allocation, coordination with professional services during actual emergencies. It would be a significant time commitment, especially during crisis situations. I'd need to think about it. Of course. But Yuliana, you've already been doing most of this work informally. This would just make it official and give you the authority to make decisions more efficiently. That evening, Yuliana sat in her garden behind her small house, watching the sun set behind her tomato plants. The garden had grown over the years from a simple hobby to a more elaborate space, with vegetables, herbs, and flowers arranged in careful patterns that reflected both practical and aesthetic considerations. She often came here when she needed to think through important decisions. The garden represented the peaceful life she had built after leaving the military, but it also reflected the principles she had learned during her service: planning, attention to detail, patience, and the understanding that good results required consistent effort over time. Her phone rang, interrupting her contemplation. The caller ID showed Kevin's number. "Hey, Yuliana. Are you busy?" "Just sitting in my garden." "What's going on?" "I got some news today. I've been offered a job as a training coordinator for the State Emergency Medical Services Program. It would mean traveling around the state, setting up training programs for rural communities." "That sounds like an excellent opportunity." "It is, but it would mean leaving the local area, and I wanted to talk to you about it first. You've been such an important mentor to me." They talked for 20 minutes about the opportunities and challenges the new position would present. Kevin was clearly excited about the work, but concerned about leaving the support network he had built locally. "You know," Yuliana said finally, "one of the things military service teaches us is that sometimes the best way to serve is to go where you're needed, most, even if it means leaving comfortable situations behind. Is that what you did when you started the veteran support groups?" "In a way. I was comfortable just selling fruit and avoiding attention. But when I realized I could help other veterans, I had to decide whether my comfort was more important than their needs." "And now you're considering taking on even more responsibility with the emergency response program." Yuliana was quiet for a moment. "How did you know about that?" "Sarah mentioned it when she told me about medical school." She said you'd probably have mixed feelings about taking on something so big. I do have mixed feelings. Part of me still wants the simple life I thought I was building. But I'm learning that you can't really separate what you want from who you are. I'm someone who knows how to organize emergency response and help people in crisis. Pretending I'm not that person doesn't make anyone safer. After they hung up, Yuliana continued sitting in her garden as full darkness settled around her. The conversation with Kevin had clarified something she had been struggling with. Each new responsibility she had accepted had felt like a departure from her intended path, but maybe her intended path had been too narrow. The next morning, she called Chief Rodriguez and Sarah to accept the coordination position. "I'm glad you decided to do this," Chief Rodriguez said during their meeting to discuss the transition. "You have a unique combination of skills: military training, community relationships, and real experience managing complex emergency situations. What are the biggest challenges I should expect?" "Funding is always tight, so you'll need to be creative about resources. Interagency coordination can be complicated because different organizations have different priorities and procedures, and you'll be dealing with situations where people are scared, stressed, and sometimes angry. I've handled scared and angry people before." "I'm sure you have. But civilian emergency management is different from military operations. You can't give orders and expect them to be followed. You have to build consensus and cooperation." "I'm learning that," Yuliana said, thinking about her experience in Millerville and other communities where she had needed to persuade rather than command. Sarah joined them for the second part of the meeting, where they discussed specific programs and ongoing projects. The scope of responsibility was larger than Yuliana had initially realized, covering not just emergency response, but also disaster preparedness, community education, and coordination with state and federal agencies. "The good news," Sarah said, "is that you already know most of the key people and have relationships with the major organizations. The structure is in place. It just needs someone to coordinate it effectively." Over the following months, Yuliana gradually took on her new responsibilities while maintaining her fruit stand and veteran support work. The challenge of balancing multiple roles was significant, but she found that the different types of work complemented each other in unexpected ways. Her experience selling fruit had taught her about customer service, patience, and building long-term relationships. Her military background provided skills in logistics, planning, and crisis management. Her work with veterans had developed her abilities in counseling, mentoring, and helping people navigate complex transitions. When a severe ice storm hit the county in February, Yuliana got her first real test as emergency response coordinator. The storm knocked out power to thousands of homes, blocked major roads with fallen trees, and created dangerous conditions that lasted for several days. Working from the Emergency Operations Center, Yuliana coordinated between utility companies working to restore power, transportation departments clearing roads, Red Cross volunteers managing emergency shelters, and medical services responding to weather-related injuries and illnesses. "Status report from Sector 7, came a radio call from one of the field teams. "Go ahead, Sector 7. "We have 15 families at the community center here. Heat and power are working, but we're running low on food and medical supplies." Yuliana checked her resource tracking board and coordinated with the logistics team to arrange a supply delivery. Similar conversations continued throughout the 3-day crisis, with dozens of teams reporting conditions and requesting resources. The most challenging moment came when an elderly man suffered a heart attack in an area where roads were blocked by ice and fallen trees. Standard ambulance access was impossible, but Yuliana remembered that one of her veteran support group members worked for a company that provided all-terrain vehicles for utility maintenance. "Marcus, this is Yuliana. I need your help with something urgent." Within an hour, Marcus had arranged for an ATV team to reach the patient and transport him to a point where an ambulance could take over. The man survived and made a full recovery. "That was excellent thinking," Chief Rodriguez told her during the after-action review. using non-traditional resources to solve access problems. That's the kind of creative problem solving that saves lives. I just thought about what resources we had available and how to connect them to the need. That's what good coordination is about. You can't know everything or control everything, but you can think creatively about how to match resources with needs. The successful handling of the ice storm emergency established Yuliana's reputation as an effective coordinator and led to increased responsibilities at the state level. She was invited to participate in a task force developing statewide emergency response protocols and began consulting with other counties on their preparedness programs. As spring arrived and the market reopened after winter repairs, Yuliana found herself busier than she had ever been, but also more satisfied with her work. The various threads of her life, fruit selling, veteran services, emergency response, had woven together into a coherent pattern of community service. Mrs. Patterson, now requiring a wheelchair for longer outings, continued her weekly visits with Jennifer's help. The 3 generations of women had developed a comfortable routine that involved selecting fruit, catching up on local news, and sharing observations about community life. "You know," Mrs. Patterson said one morning, "I've been thinking about how much this place has changed since you started working here. The market? The market, yes, but also the community. There's more connection now. People look out for each other more. I think your work has something to do with that." Jennifer nodded agreement. "My friends at school all know who you are. When we have emergency drills, the teachers always mention that we have someone local who helps coordinate the county's emergency response." "It's not just me," Yuliana said. "There are lots of people involved in making the community safer and more connected." "Yes, but you're the one who brings them together," Mrs. Patterson insisted. "That's a special skill, knowing how to help people work together effectively." As she arranged a display of spring vegetables, Yuliana reflected on how her role in the community had evolved. She had started as someone seeking anonymity and peace, but had gradually become a central figure in multiple networks of service and support. The transformation hadn't been planned or even entirely voluntary. Each step had emerged from circumstances that required her to choose between personal comfort and community need. But the cumulative effect had been to create a life of purpose and connection that felt more authentic than anything she had imagined during her years of trying to forget her military experience. Her phone buzzed with a text from Colonel Peterson, the foundation representative who had first offered funding for her veteran programs. "Congratulations on the state task force appointment," the message read. "Would you be interested in discussing a larger role in veteran services at the regional level?" Yuliana smiled as she put the phone away. The opportunities for service seemed to multiply faster than she could accept them, but she had learned to evaluate each possibility carefully rather than automatically saying yes or no. As afternoon customers began arriving at her stand, Yuliana greeted them with the same quiet professionalism she had always shown. But now she understood that serving customers fruit and serving the community's emergency preparedness needs were both expressions of the same fundamental commitment, taking care of the people around her using whatever skills and resources she possessed. The soldier, the fruit seller, the mentor, and the coordinator had finally learned to work together as different aspects of the same person, and Yuliana was ready for whatever new challenges and opportunities that integration might bring. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We'd love to hear what inspired you the most, and where in the world are you watching from? Let us know below.